Hey, Pete, welcome to the show.
Hey, Simon, it's great to be on the show. And I'm such a big fan of yours and I look forward to having this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, and the feeling's mutual, and just full disclosure here for anyone listening, I have met Pete before. I had the pleasure of chatting to him probably a little over 12 months ago. We do dance in some similar circles, which is how we have got to know each other. But no, I've always enjoy your time, Pete, and really love your perspective on things. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome, my pleasure.
I know we're going to get to the point of chatting about your business EntryPoint, which you sold, and then of course what you do today. But perhaps just to kick things off for the listeners, maybe you could just give us a little bit of your background and kind of what led to you starting EntryPoint.
Yeah, so I'm genetically encoded an entrepreneur. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. My father was. My brother is, and so I don't think I had a choice. And so I actually started a car leasing company when I was 18 years old and was kind of the classic snot-nosed, think I knew everything kind of kid, 18. And wow, starting a business at 18, particularly car leasing and that was way back when that was really not a common thing. And the world just kind of smacked me around. And so did that for 3.5 years, sold my franchise rights to another franchisee, got out by the skin of my teeth and decided to go to school at that point. So I kind of did everything a little bit opposite and went to university and got a bachelor's and an MBA in 3.5 years. And then went the complete opposite direction. And I worked for IBM for almost 8 years and then SAP in executive management for about 7. And in 2002, I was actually laid off from SAP. The short story is it was kind of a reorg between two divisions. Completely redundant management team. So all the management team of one of the divisions was basically let go. So 2 levels up, 2 levels down. But like any kind of opportunity, I was getting tired. I told my boss, 6 months before that, I said, I don't know what I'm going to do because you're not going anywhere and I want your job. And so, full disclosure, I'm kind of looking. So it was really kind of a blessing. So I spent, actually about another 6 months after SAP as a COO for a software company. Long story there. I did not get along with the CEO, so I quit and said, maybe it's time to go scratch this entrepreneurial itch again. So after I had left, a guy who had built, sold, raised $80 million in venture capital, took his company public, took it private again, wanted one more bite at the apple. And so he reached out and said, hey, let's go start up this systems integration consulting firm around SAP. So I agreed to do that. And that's how I got started with EntryPoint.
And that was EntryPoint, yeah. So I'm always curious, right? I mean, you started off doing a bit of an entrepreneurial pursuit at a young age. So clearly you had a really solid taste of small business and what it's like to go through that kind of early stages. But then going to really the biggest end of town, back to doing your own thing. Was there a bit of a mind shift there? Like, how had you become a little institutionalized, or did it feel like putting on an old coat?
Wow, that's an interesting question. So I'll tell you a funny story is about when I interviewed with IBM, coming from the entrepreneurial venture right in school. I sat down with this branch manager. So this guy ran about a $500 million business. Okay. Huge book of business. And, but when I was interviewing, he said, yeah, I run my business and blah, 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 blah. And I said, you don't run your business. And he's like, what? And I said, so if your team doesn't sell anything tomorrow, are you going to be paid? And he's like, well, yes, of course. And I said, then you're not running a business, right? And I'm sure he's what a jerk, right? But I think, he's like, he wanted a little bit of that energy in the organization. And so I don't think I ever really lost that, right? So both at IBM and SAP, and I think that the management team and the team that I was around, I think appreciated that because I was never really the big institution guy. And so when I left both those organizations and kind of went back into the entrepreneurial thing, it was definitely going back to that comfortable coat for sure because I never really took it off.
Yeah, nice. It's funny. I had a similar experience going into one of the big banks here. They said to me, "We're hiring you because you're not from banking." The problem was they actually weren't ready for people not from banking, and it's it can be quite a clash in terms of ideals. So
for sure.
So tell us a bit about EntryPoint. What did the business do?
Yeah, so there's a software package from a company out of Germany called SAP, for those who are not familiar with it. So it is basically a financial system and manufacturing procurement. It's the system that runs most of the companies in the world today, literally runs the operations. And so instead of building a consulting force to implement that software, they partnered with lots and lots of companies, from the big guys, from Deloitte and Accenture or whoever, to companies like mine. And so we focused on small and mid-size enterprises, any company below 500 million in revenue. And so we would actually resell the software. We had a separate company that did that. And then we would actually go do the consulting work to implement that software in those companies. We then later built a business process outsourcing firm. So there was a particular set of software around import, export, and global trade management. And we approached a couple companies about literally outsourcing that entire function to us. And so we started up that group. And so I essentially had 3 independent businesses, all part of the kind of in and around the SAP software.
Yeah, nice. So they all kind of overlap and offer leverage to each other in a way.
Correct.
Yeah. And typically, what was the model? I mean, were you doing a lot of project-based work? Was it ongoing kind of retainer styles? What did that look like? Yeah,
so it was a very traditional systems integration company, which was mostly project work. And the billing went from, we did some fixed price projects, but the majority of it was time and materials. And so, and there were kind of 2 models in the systems integration space. You can have a bunch of independent contractors, right, where cash flow is better because you don't pay your contractors until you get paid. Or you have employees, which is what we did, where it is a massive cash suck. And so the faster you grow, the more cash you consume. And that then tied to the fact that we were a project-based business. Your revenues were very, very lumpy, as they say. And so when we had a big project, then everybody was off the bench. Profits were great. Cash was great. If we had those times in between projects until a new one started up, we had people sitting on the bench, and it hurt for a while. So, it can be a very profitable business, but again, very lumpy revenue, not as predictable as you'd like. And we'll kind of talk about, before 2 years before I sold it, how we started to really change the business to make the business much more attractive to a potential acquirer.
Yeah, fantastic. How long were you running EntryPoint before you did sell?
Let's see here. So I started in 2003 and we sold in 2014. So.
Okay, so 11 odd years. And I'm curious, so you've started with this, you've got a business partner. Was it just the 2 of you?
Correct, as the founders, yeah.
Yeah. And did you have a discussion at that beginning, about what the end game would look like and potential exit strategy? Did you think you would start this business with the idea of selling it eventually?
Yeah, we did. We basically, our philosophy was, and my business partner had bought and sold a ton of companies. As I mentioned, he took the company public, he took it private again. And so we basically sat down and said, look, we both want an exit at some point, but we don't want to predetermine or predestine what that exit looks like. It could be an LBO, it could be going public, it could be selling to a strategic, whatever it is. So let's just build a really, really valuable company, because when you do that, then you have the maximum amount of options, right? I know founders that literally will build a company to sell, and you just make very, very different decisions, and they typically are not positive for employees, right? And so it was kind of a twofold thing. So he wanted the second bite of an apple. At the time, he was in his early 60s. So we kind of put a time frame together about when he wanted to be bought out. We put a buy-sell agreement in place for that. And then after that, I own nearly 100%. We ended up bringing in a third partner, but we basically said, once kind of that exit's done, then I can go do whatever exit in whatever time frame that I might want. Or I could just continue to, to be the chairman and just kind of let it go for a while. So
yeah, and Pete, I know you and I, we do a lot of similar work in terms of helping companies and helping them build and understand value and ultimately even exiting. I'm just curious as to what you see out there with business owners around this mentality of exiting. I mean, we preach a lot about having the end game in mind, but my experience, I think a lot of people struggle to get their head around it. I don't know. What's your experience around all that?
Yeah, boy, we could unpack a lot here. I think that so EntryPoint was the fourth company that I had sold technically. And so, I had a very clear set of expectations, and most business owners don't get the chance to exit. And if they do, it's usually their first one, right? And they have all these preconceived notions about what that means, from the price they're going to get to the terms to are they going to get an earnout to what do they do after, thinking through, okay, I'm going to get the best deal, but I forget that I've got to be an employee maybe for a couple of years. And so if I really upset and piss these guys off, I'm now working for a company where they hate me, right? And so it's everything from I think it's just kind of either the wrong set of assumptions or expectations, or just naivety, right? And really not understanding all of the dimensions that go into thinking through how do you do it right. How do you prepare for an exit properly so that you get the maximum valuation, you get the best deal terms, and then post-exit, what do you do, right? Frankly, from managing your money to what are you going to do on a day-to-day basis so you don't drive your family crazy, right? Just lots of conversations, and even the mental game of, hey, somebody's going to write me a 8, 9, 10-figure check. Do I have enough self-worth to deserve that? I mean, I've dealt with a founder that just didn't want to sell because he didn't want that huge check. Literally crazy.
Wow. Yeah. It's amazing what we tell ourselves sometimes. So can you give us a bit of a sense, 11 years, you've started off with a couple of founders and an idea. What did the business look like by the time you did exit in terms of sort of size and all the rest of it?
Yeah, so when we exited that part of the business, we had peeled off this business process outsourcing company that was 27 people. We basically spun off the software reseller piece that was about a dozen people. So the pure systems integration consulting, I think we had 38 people at that point. Okay. And about 2 years before the sale, I was just getting antsy. I'm a kind of your classic serial entrepreneur. I get bored after a couple of years. When it starts to get kind of routine and mechanized, I'm like, okay, I want to go do something else. And so kind of I knew I was getting itchy and was not as enthusiastic and passionate about the business as I should have been, right, as the CEO and founder. And so I kind of had made that point the decision at that point internally that, okay, it was time to kind of put the pieces in place to go towards an exit. And so one of the first things I did was I looked at how ingrained in the business I was, and it was deep. I was the main sales guy, right? I was doing the majority of the deals, reviewed every contract, like all of the stuff that typical, we advise business owners not to do, I was doing. And what was really interesting was I looked at the leadership team and said, wow, these guys are actually unbelievable. And they're like, none of them are kind of rising up to their capacity. And so when I made the decision, we kind of made two strategic decisions. One was pull Pete out of the business on a day-to-day basis. And then the other one was figure out how we can get some recurring revenue streams and start to at least not necessarily get rid of all the lumpy revenue, but at least flatten it out a little bit. Right.
Yeah.
So when I first started pulling out of the business, I actually took, the way we went to market is we were much like an accounting law firm where you kind of eat what you kill. And so most of these people were still billable and they were selling, but none of them had ever had formal sales training. So we sent them through formal sales training, and we did lots of workshops about objection handling and just how do you engage with a client, and they were kind of doing it anyway, but there was no formal structure. So we sent them through that. I pulled myself out of those situations and revenue went like this, right? It
wow.
Started,
and that was a big hockey curve there for those who can't see the video.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And it's so funny because it's such an ego hit, right? You're like, oh my God, I've been holding back the company, right? It's like, these guys are killing it. And we're growing faster than we ever were when I was the main guy doing the sales. And so, but that was really cool. And it was just kind of really cool to see them step up and to see the organization kind of evolve without me being at the center of everything. A little scary. I mean, we put in some controls and, we put in our own kind of internal systems that would put enough controls in place that I could sleep well at night. But it's still, it's a bit of an ego, hit a little bit, but also really, really cool too, just to kind of see these people step up. The other thing we did was, we took basically our core project-based service offerings and we dissected it into these little kind of digestible pieces. And a couple of them we made wedge offerings where we offered it for free or very little money to get people kind of, working with us. But two of them we made into recurring revenue stream models we just knew that this was something that every client asked for. It was kind of a pain in the butt for us. We staffed it differently. And then we turned it into just this retainer-based kind of recurring revenue stream. And that ended up being about 25% of the business. And it really flattened that project-based curve and just had consistent cash flow and predictability and everything else.
Nice. Tell me, with the whole point, I'm stepping back a bit, but with moving you out of the business and taking the focus off you as the rainmaker, how long did that process sort of take before you could, really recognize that it's now taken on a life of its own?
Yeah. It was probably 6 months end to end. The first 3 months, I would do kind of ride-alongs. So I kind of made this pronouncement. I said, this is kind of the direction we're going to move in. And I did these ride-alongs. And so we basically did joint selling, but I would do a lot less talking. I was there, but I would really let them kind of hold the stage. And then we were both kind of comfortable, all of us were comfortable that they could kind of take over. I just stopped attending the meetings and stopped doing the sales at all. And then they'd call up and say, hey, I just got this, issue with a client, or how should I deal with this, whatever. And, I just say, hey, just kind of, we would kind of talk through it. And so that kind of happened for another 3 to 4 months. And then they're like, Martin, we don't need you, man. We got this. So
that's lovely.
Yeah, we're gonna move.
Yeah, I'm surprised because I was in my head thinking you might say 12 months or something like that. So, I mean, but it sounds like, you've made this announcement and you've really kind of engaged it. I've got a little expression, I'm sure you've heard it as well, but you can't be half pregnant, right? And I think this is the thing with, like either do this or don't do this, but don't kind of half do it and meander along and send mixed messages to your staff and all that sort of stuff. But 6 months is fabulous. It's I'm sure there'll be lots of professional service people on this listening to this who go, wow, this is exactly what I need to be doing.
And it's funny because I think if I look back at my SAP and IBM experiences, I had those situations where they would say, Pete, we want you to run with this. And then the manager's there and the manager's kind of doing all the talking. So I saw what not to do. So I think that really helped when I said, we're going to do this. I just told myself, I'm not going to do that. Right. I'm going to do this, to your point, right? I'm going to do this right. And we're not going to be half pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. I don't know if you're able to tell us, like the business by the time you sold it. Can you give us a sense of revenue and stuff like that, or anything that's sensitive? Of course, please don't worry about. But
under NDA with KPMG, we're actually not allowed to release that stuff. But what I can say is we sold the business for 12 times EBITDA, which in the professional services space is pretty phenomenal. And the most important thing was no earnout.
Wow. Okay. So just to repeat that, in case people they're wondering if you misheard that, 12 times EBITDA with no earnout. Okay. So we need to unpack that because everybody is now sitting on the edge of their seats.
Yep. So there's a kind of a funny story there. So So in addition to putting the pieces in place for the business to be able to sell at a 12 times EBITDA valuation, and to be able to sell it successfully, right? I started creating some strategic relationships with those companies that I thought would be a strategic buyer. One of them was KPMG. Okay. And so I was very thoughtful and strategic and kind of forward thinking about, where I wanted to go. And what the biggest reason that I did that was not from the acquisition perspective. I wanted to understand culture, right? Culture fits is incredibly important. And we had a phenomenal team and I wanted to serve them. I wanted to do the right thing for them, right? And going from our company, 30-some people, to this, any giant company is this huge shift, right? And I wanted to make sure the culture was a good fit. And so once we started engaging with KPMG, we actually decided to do a joint pursuit together. And we ended up not winning it, but we really started to understand how each other sells. And a big thing that I found out, and I kind of intuitively knew this, but they were in this advisory business of really high bill rates, really short engagements, kind of like an audit, right? And so their bill rates were probably 50% higher, but their engagements were like a month or two, right? Like in an audit. Well, what they were doing is they were basically saying, this is what you need to do. And then we were stepping in and going, okay, and we'll do it. And guess what? We just have a 1.5-year project with 14 people, right? Or whatever. Nice. And so we were getting 10x the revenue of those guys. So a big part of kind of going through this in the initial phases was I could then paint the picture for them. And, I literally wrote the narrative of why they should do the deal in the first place. I'm like, if you guys got this book of business doing these small projects on the strategy work, then we're getting all the implementation work and it's 10x the revenues we're getting. So build the business case from that, right? And so that was just a huge part of the whole strategic narrative and ended up going into the business plan. And I'm super glad to report that 3 years after the fact, they made all of their numbers in the business plan, which is really cool.
Wow. That's great.
But to go back to kind of the question about the no earnout. So we started doing the due diligence, and you can imagine, going through the due diligence of the 4th largest auditing company in the world, right? It was pretty tough, but we passed with flying colors, which was phenomenal. And we're kind of moving along. We're putting the asset purchase agreement together. It was 120 pages, I think. And everything was kind of moving along fine. And we hit this point after about 6 months where it just seemed to stall. And so I called up my business sponsor and I said, what's going on? It's kind of communication stopped. Are you guys walking away from the deal, or are you concerned about something? Like, what's up? And,
so Pete, business sponsor, sorry to interrupt you, but you said business sponsor. So was that somebody inside KPMG?
Yes.
So that business sponsor is somebody internally at KPMG who's sponsoring the deal and basically quarterbacking it from their end. Is that about right?
That's correct. And our company would literally kind of fold into his practice. So he was going to own this whole thing. And so they wanted to make sure that there was a senior partner, equity partner in the firm that was going to own this thing, right? And
Gotcha.
Be compensated on the success of it. And so, he said, he said, Pete, I really don't know what the issue is, to be honest with you. And I said, well, who's ultimately making the decision? And he said, the vice chairman of KPMG. And I said, great, then give me a meeting. He's like, you want to meet with the vice chairman of KPMG? And I said, if you want to get the deal done, get me a meeting. I'll get the deal unstuck. Whatever it is, we'll get it unstuck, right? We're just too far down the pike at this point. So he's like, okay. And so a week later, got a meeting with the vice chairman of KPMG and go to New York and sit down and they'll do the rapport thing. And we kind of got to it. And I said, look, it seems like everything was marching along great. What's the concern? What's the issue, right? And he said, look, Pete, he said, we buy a lot of companies. He said, we've never bought a company where the founder and the CEO didn't go with the deal. And so it's giving me heartburn. Why are you not going with the deal? Is there something I should know? And so my response was, and it was true, is I said, if you look at the book of business from the last 12 months, I wasn't involved in any one of the deals. I can tell you who the company is because I signed the contract. I couldn't tell you a single individual, the project sponsor, the signatory of the contract, nothing. I just know who the company was. You're buying the people that are, the rainmakers and the revenue engine. And I said, that's not me. I'm pure overhead. And I said, on top of that, I'm an entrepreneur. This is my fourth company. And I said, I'm not going to make a good employee. And so even if you want me, I'm going to be really expensive and I'm probably going to be a total pain in the butt. And he said, nope, I get it. We're good. We're good here. And so we closed, I think 30 days later and nowhere out. And, we put a little bit of money at risk. I think there was a 6-month payout period that certain key employees were going to stay on in the organization and that all the customers would come over and both happened and it got paid out entirely. So including the indemnification rollback. So.
Wow. Well, I mean, first of all, congratulations. I mean, what an amazing outcome. I mean, no earn-out alone is amazing, but then a 12 times EBITDA is just phenomenal. And can I ask, I mean, did you have, before all that happened, did you think 12 times EBITDA, like before you started going into a process of selling, or, what number did you have in your mind before it all started?
Well, that's a good question. I had a number, I had a range of numbers, and the range of numbers were based on, so one thing that I always tell clients is you don't separate price and terms. They go together, right? And so I had a range of numbers based on a certain set of terms, and this was an all cash deal. So that was obviously the lower range of the number. And then I had a higher range of the number that if they wanted, a seller's note, if they wanted, all these kind of clauses and earnouts or whatever, then there was going to be a higher number. And we ended up getting to somewhere kind of in the middle of what my range was. But I wasn't stuck on it. And to me, it was, if I got a fair deal for me, the business owner, and my other partner at the time, and I felt like the team was going to a good place, I was cool with that. And I would have taken a lower number to have my team go to a better place than, somebody that gave a high number, but I know they were just going to spit out the team.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing that. It's interesting what you say there about the employees, and I've had a lot of conversations with business owners over the years about this concept of legacy. And I think when I say that, a lot of people think it means whether they've got their name on the door, and I try to break it down in simple terms and say I kind of see it more as, how do people feel about you when you've left the room? And and that could be your suppliers or your customers or your employees or whomever, right? Even your family. So, I just think that's a great example that you've given there where, sometimes, money's important, but it's not necessarily the only thing. So I guess if people are hearing this, it's the message is don't wait till you're halfway through a deal to think about that sort of stuff, because it can throw you into a bit of a emotional spiral at times. So yeah.
And I think even as it comes to if there's any kind of a holdback, an indemnification holdback, an earnout, there's all kinds of ways to hold back money, right? If that team that goes over to the new company, if it's a really bad cultural clash and they're not performing, right, it will affect you monetarily at some point in time. Maybe not immediately, but at some point in time, it most likely will. So it's critical, just morally, professionally, and frankly, financially.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Can I ask, did you offer any incentive to those key staff, a 6 or 12 month bonus or something for hanging around or anything like that?
Yeah, we did two things. So I asked KPMG to throw money in the pot as well. So they threw about 15, 20% of the deal. They didn't deduct it from my deal. They kind of added on top of that to make sure those people stayed. And they did that for, there was a couple that were 12 months, 18 months, and 24 months for, I think, 5 or 6 of the key team members. And then I took a chunk of the money and also did the same thing for 6 months. And it was actually one of the biggest sticking points because they wanted me to sign up for a holdback I think they asked for 2 years, and then it kind of went to 18 months, and then it kind of went to 12 months. And I said, look, after about 6 months, they're not mine anymore. I mean, you fully enveloped them in your culture. And at that point, it's your business. It's your job to hold on to them. And if you don't, like my job's done, right? It's like raising a child. When they're teenager, you're kind of done.
Yeah.
And so we were able to negotiate that 6 months. So they got chunks at 6 months from me, essentially. And then they got more chunks, 12, 18, and 24 months after that. And everybody has stayed by one. So
you just preempted my next question. Well, and isn't that great? I mean, clearly the work that's done in advance, you saw the fit, and to KPMG's credit, they fostered it and did the right thing, obviously, to keep them there. So
yeah, and dealing with employees is obviously always a big deal, right? With these things, but particularly for the business owners and CEOs that care for their teams. And my pitch to them was, from a personal, professional development perspective, I can only give them so many opportunities with the size of the company we were. With this big company, right, it's a much bigger sandbox to play in, much bigger deals, much more complex everything. And so their ability to grow professionally and personally was much bigger than anything that I could ever do. And I think they thought in the beginning that was just a bunch of BS. But I think, once they looked at the training KPMG could offer and like the leadership develop, all this stuff, they're like, oh yeah, okay, we kind of get it.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. So yeah, you become a small fish in a much bigger pond, but geez, that gives you a lot of room for growth.
Yep, exactly.
I'm curious, when you went through the process with KPMG, were there other parties that were also taking a look at your business?
They thought that. We had two other companies who were kind of nipping at the edges. I could tell they weren't earnest in their consideration. After we were like 90% of the way through with KPMG, we did have one of those companies came back and tried to put the hard press on. And I'm like, look, you guys kind of passed 6 months ago. And if you were earnest then, you would have had a seat at the table. But at this point, no, I'm committed to these guys and I'm going to get the deal done. So, but from what, my kind of feigning, competitive interest with KPMG, they thought for sure there was at least one other company involved. So,
and there is the lesson, right? You only need one actual buyer willing to pay you the reasonable rate to get a deal done, but certainly positioning it is important. I'm curious, Pete, because we've sold a number of professional service companies over the years, and one of the big things that I've found is that there's a lot of sensitivity around confidentiality, and particularly if there's a competitor out there who's kind of taking an interest. I don't know if that's been an experience of yours as well, but have you got any thoughts around how to handle that type of thing?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we had sold off other pieces of the business. So our the business that did the software reselling, and we had some software products around it, we ended up selling that to a direct competitor. So this was a really interesting one. So what we ended up doing, even in terms of the data room, for those who don't know what that is basically all the documents that an acquirer is going to look at in the secure portal that would be pertinent to doing due diligence and doing the acquisition. So we scrubbed everything. We made sure there were no customer names, there were no employee names. We kind of knew each other enough that we kind of knew a lot of the stuff anyway. But that was very concerning to us, and we knew if these guys walked away, we were giving them some pretty significant confidential information. So we just did a pretty good job of redacting every document we could think of. I think there were some customer names that slipped through a couple places, but we also knew that their leadership team was pretty high integrity, and that, we hoped they wouldn't take advantage of, any confidential information they would have given us. And then said, if the deal's kind of done and they could put it in escrow, then we'll go ahead and obviously they'll see the customer names and all this other kind of stuff at that point. So.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a period between signing the deal, the contract, money's put in escrow, and there's a period there in between where they get to kind of double check everything that was redacted or, that was held confidential.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Bit of the black box scenario. So, okay. Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Pete, I honestly could talk to you all day about this stuff, and next time I'm in the States, I'm coming to Ohio to visit you. But
excellent, welcome down there.
Yeah, and so, yes, exactly. Vice versa when you come to Australia. Tell me, are you happy for people to be reaching out and connecting with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love doing this. I started a firm called Ask My Board about a year ago. I had been mentoring CEOs and entrepreneurs for probably 10 to 15 years and spending hours and hours kind of having these conversations. And a friend of mine came to me and said, Pete, you're not valuing your time. Like, you can charge for this stuff, right? And you've got, you've sold 4 companies for God's sakes and started 2 others. So you've got a lot of lessons you could teach people. So, so I just love doing this. And, I still do a lot of this. I sit on a lot of advisory boards and I'd be willing and happy to help anybody out. So.
No, that's brilliant. And so tell us a little bit about it. Ask My Board is your current firm is that where you spend most of your time these days?
Yeah, I actually have 2 firms. One is an online voting company called Votum. We do voting on blockchain. It has completely nothing to do with Ask My Board. And then just because of all these relationships and advisory boards and stuff that I do, Ask My Board is just one of my passions as well. So I've got the 2 companies that are stocked.
Yeah. So I think when you say voting, everyone thinks it's a Dominion, and all the, geez, there's been a lot in the press about all that sort of stuff. So I look forward to hearing how Votum comes along and if you are listening to this,
US elections, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolute madness. And I note that it's still going on. So anyway, but so look, for those who are interested, you can reach out to Pete. He's certainly on LinkedIn. His website is askmyboard.com, and you'll see a lot of really useful information on there about building value and thinking about your exit, and certainly exiting on your own terms. We'll put some links in the show notes. So, and if you do reach out to Pete on LinkedIn, please put a little note there to let him know that you heard him interviewed on the podcast. So he has a little context as to maybe why you're reaching out. And Pete, thank you so much for coming on the show and spending some time and sharing your story with us.
Thanks, Simon. This has been a lot of fun and happy to do it. And thank you for all that you do, because I think we're both trying to really help entrepreneurs just get the best deal and do the right thing and do it once and don't screw it up, right? Because you're going to get one shot. So.
Absolutely. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Simon.